And if I told you that Lewis Hamilton, after weeks of frustration and low performance, has just deciphered the enigma of the Ferrari SF-25 just in time for the most important race for the Scuderia? Are you about to start a new red era in Imola? From the first preseason test in Bahrain, the SF-25 showed unpredictable behaviors. The car, although visually aggressive and with promising elements in its aerodynamic design, had fundamental balance problems. Lewis quickly noticed that the reference points he had used for more than a decade no longer applied. The direction of the car was sensitive but not communicative, the traction in the output of compromised curves, and the most frustrating, the rear train response varied without warning depending on the state of the tires and the amount of fuel. In Melbourne, stage of the first Grand Prix, that disconnection became evident. During the classification, Hamilton barely managed to place his car in the fourth row, far from his expectations and behind his own partner, Charles Leclerc. Already in the race, the climate chaos and the strategic decisions of the team only aggravated their situation. The intermittent rain and the bad reading of the change of conditions condemned him to a forgettable GP. Hamilton, who still tried to understand the car, was trapped behind slower cars, without the ability to advance them efficiently due to the instability of the SF-25 under acceleration. That weekend he evidenced a raw reality: the transition would not be immediate. And what made it more complicated was the contrast. McLaren, his former rival, had started the season with an almost perfect execution. Red Bull, although under pressure, continued to show competitiveness. Meanwhile, Hamilton and Ferrari seemed to be one step back, both in rhythm and mutual understanding. But the pressure did not come only from abroad. Internally, Lewis faced one of the deepest dilemmas of his career. Persist in his style and demand that the car adapt as he had done in previous years, or accept that the path to victory was to rebuild as a pilot from scratch, adapting to a completely foreign philosophy? Most of the champions in their place with their record and age would probably have limited themselves to hold the team. But this is where the true story of the Renaissance begins to take shape. Hamilton did not break, but he began to listen. Instead of imposing, he began to collaborate. He spoke with engineers, asked telemetries de Leclerc, studied the active car suspension data and compared trajectories. He acknowledged that the SF-25 was not a bad car per se, but one that required a different mentality. And although the process was painful, the seeds of a transformation began to plant in those first weekends. The challenge was not just a technician. It was deeply human. In Formula One, performance is not always transformed by immediate technical change. Sometimes, which redefines the trajectory of a season, even a sports career, is something much more subtle: an internal decision. And that was exactly what happened with Lewis Hamilton in Bahrain. Unlike the great show offered by overtaking, poles or victories, this was a silent turn, almost imperceptible from the outside, but monumental in its implications. During the Bahrain Grand Prix, Ferrari did not have substantial improvements. Nor was there a miraculous rain that shuffled the established order. What changed, and changed everything, was Hamilton's approach. For the first time since he got on the SF-25, he stopped fighting the car and began to understand it in his own terms. This apparently technical gesture was actually a strategic surrender. The British champion understood that he could not continue applying the same principles he had polished in Mercedes. The Ferrari was not a car that rewarded aggressiveness in braking or tolerated sudden steering wheel corrections. Nor was it a car that responded to a reactive driving style. Instead, I needed an anticipatory, almost surgical approach, where each action should be measured with millimetric accuracy. This change was the result of multiple factors. On the one hand, there were the data. Hamilton and his group of engineers began to analyze the differences with Charles Leclerc, a pilot who had lived with Ferrari's philosophy for years. They detected patterns. Leclerc braking before, yes, but one in traction and stability. He had a more progressive approach to the accelerator, softer in the steering wheel inputs, and allowed the car to maintain critical stability in the middle zone of the curves. It was not faster because it was aggressive, but for understanding how to operate within the functional limits of the car. Hamilton absorbed this information, but did not stay alone in the numbers. He began to modify his own style from the root. It was not a simple decision to stop before, but to change its own pilot logic. He started working more with the motor brake, to dose the torque delivered by the hybrid system, to position the car so that the SF-25 felt more balanced without the need to force it. He stopped attacking the curve entrance as he did in the past and began preparing the outputs, maximizing the traction without generating survival. The interesting thing is that these changes were not immediately translated into a performance explosion. There was no pole in Bahrain, not a miraculous podium. But there was a new line of telemetry. one that for the first time showed Hamilton approaching Leclerc in critical circuit sections. The margins were minimal, just a few hundredths per curve. But in a sport where success is measured in milliseconds, these small adjustments were the prelude to a complete transformation. The most revealing came after the Miami Grand Prix. There, Lewis pronounced a few words that, although brief, summed up the exact point in which he was. "We know where the loss is. We are waiting for a solution." That phrase was not a complaint, but a confirmation. For the first time throughout the season, the 7-time world champion spoke with conviction. Not as someone who doubts the car, but as someone who has understood. He had identified the key points of loss of performance, and most importantly, he knew that the next step no longer depended on him, but on the team. That trust is what defines the great champions. It is not only the ability to adapt, but to diagnose clearly, to transform when the situation demands it. Lewis Hamilton, after years of being at the top, had started again from scratch. And he had done it in silence, without boasts or headlines, but with a determination that was now beginning to be reflected in each wheel turn. Imola is not just one more career in the Formula One. It's Ferrari's spiritual home. It is the scenario where the passion of the Tifosi is not limited to the stands, but it melts with the asphalt, the centenary trees of the Enzo and Dino Ferrari Autodrome, and the story of a team that does not run simply by trophies, but by honor. For any Ferrari pilot, running in Emilia Romagna represents more than points. It is a character test. And this year, Lewis Hamilton comes to that test with a new narrative behind him. That of someone who has rebuilt in record time and now prepares for the first great opportunity to redefine his story with the rampant Cavallino. Emilia Romagna's Grand Prix of 2025 is presented as the point of inflection, not only emotional but technical, for Maranello's team. After a start of the season full of doubts, frustrations and questions, Ferrari has prepared its first large update package, carefully designed to adapt the SF-25 to the modern demands of the championship. This set of improvements is not merely aesthetic or symbolic. It is based on weeks of simulations, wind tunnel and data collected from Bahrain, Australia, China and Miami. The main focus of the new pieces is in the middle zone of the car, in particular the pontones and the diffuser. Ferrari has redesigned the pontones with a more stylized and aggressive philosophy, adopting elements that seek to channel the air with greater efficiency towards the rear of the car, reducing the drag but increasing the aerodynamic load. This change is vital for a car that has so far shown instability in fast curves and difficulty maintaining optimal temperature in rear tires. Engineers have also worked on an evolution of the flat background, a critical part for the soil effect, looking for greater load consistency without compromising peak speed. But the most interesting is not in the new pieces, but who will be the first to interpret them thoroughly: Hamilton. After weeks of adaptation, it comes to Imola with a much more sharp technical sensitivity, with a clear understanding of the needs of the SF-25 and a more fluid communication with its engineers. The first tests in the simulator have been promising. Hamilton has been optimistic not for what he feels, but for what he sees in the data. For the first time since he dressed in red, there is a convergence between theory and reality. The car responds. Trajectories can be repeated consistently. Trust returns, and with it, the potential for pure performance. The internal situation of the team has also changed. Charles Leclerc, who initially seemed more adapted to the car, has had difficulty maintaining consistency. His style, so refined to the SF-24 last year, has not shown so well with the new platform. This, far from generating a conflict, has created a strategic opportunity. Ferrari can now analyze two different driving styles with cross data and make more informed decisions regarding the development of the car. Lewis provides experience, structured analysis, and a tactical capacity tested over more than 300 large awards. But the tension does not disappear. The running pressure at home is immense. Thousands of fans will be waiting for Ferrari not only to compete, but to dominate. And any error will be amplified. For Hamilton, this is not new. He has dealt with the pressure of Silverstone, with the boos of Monza, and with the requirement to lead for years in a team accustomed to winning. However, Imola represents another dimension. It is not the pressure of defending a legacy, but the opportunity to create a new one, dressed in red, in the same scenario where other Ferrari giants wrote indelible chapters. This weekend will not guarantee a podium, nor will it solve the differences with McLaren and Red Bull. But it will mark the beginning of something much more important, an increasingly narrow synchrony between the car, the team, and a pilot who dared to start over. If the forecasts are fulfilled, Imola will be the prologue of the renaissance not only of Ferrari, but also of a Lewis Hamilton that has shown that real talent is not to win when everything is easy, but adapt, change and return to compete when everything seems against it. Formula One rarely offers second opportunities. It is a machine that devours pilots, talents, and projects without looking back. But from time to time, a story arises that challenges that logic, which captures attention not because of its immediate spectacularity, but for its human, technical, and emotional depth. That is exactly what Lewis Hamilton is building with Ferrari in this 2025. And everything really begins in Imola. The technical advance that Hamilton has achieved is not something that is only reflected in chronometers. It is a more difficult evolution to quantify, but much more powerful. That of a pilot who has managed to reprogram himself. Since his arrival at the Italian team, he has traveled a rare path for someone of his status. It went from the discomfort to introspection, of the initial rejection of strategic acceptance, and of frustration to a real understanding of SF25. What seemed like a risky, almost romantic decision, begins to show signs of being a master play. But this path is not exclusive to Hamilton. It also represents a transformation for Ferrari. The team, for years trapped in cycles of expectation without substance, now finds in Hamilton a compass that points towards a new way of building competitiveness. Not from overflowing emotion, but from rigor, analysis, experience, and adaptation ability that only a multi-champion can contribute. The evolution of SF25 is not happening by chance. It is being driven from within, with a different dynamic where pilot and engineers work as a single unit. Where each batch of each simulator stint and each data session are not routine, but part of a meticulous reconstruction process. And this is where the true value of Emilia Romagna's Grand Prix enters. Not only is it a key career for the classification of the championship, or a symbolic appointment in the calendar. It is, above all, the place where Hamilton's ability will be measured to translate his personal evolution in tangible performance. Where Ferrari can demonstrate that he no longer lives on memories, but begins to write a new, modern, bold narrative. Imola represents a possible validation, a scenario where the silent effort of these months can become visible, where the results can finally speak. The fascinating thing is that a victory is not needed for this process to be considered a success. What is sought now is evidence. Coherence between what has been learned and what can be executed. A solid classification session, a race where the rhythm is constant, where strategic decisions are aligned and where the car shows signs of entering its optimal performance window. If that happens, Ferrari can go to Barcelona with a clear road map, and Hamilton with the certainty that he is not only in the right place, but also arrives at the right time. And for fans of Formula One, what is coming is even more promising. If this synergy process between pilot and car is consolidated, what is being born is not just a competitive renaissance of Hamilton.